Hello. So today we're going to talk about biomechanics for birth. We're going to talk about why it's so important to look at how your body is working throughout your pregnancy in the hope that it can give you a smoother process when you come to going into labour. So it doesn't unfortunately offer any guarantees. I am just going to say that right at the beginning that, you can do everything in the world and then your baby just decides not to cooperate. So don't put too much pressure on yourself, but I do think it's good to be aware of this stuff so that you've got the option of doing it, and in the hope that it might give you a better and easier labour in the long run. So we're going to talk about how you can make day-to-day changes to improve your baby's position. We're going to talk about why biomechanics matter when you're in the birth process and during your pregnancy. We're going to learn about techniques to help your baby to get into the perfect position for them to be born in. And we're going to learn about positioning during labour and birth. So I've been teaching this work. So I think I did my first course about 2 years ago, and then another one last summer. And it's only really since last summer that I've properly started to use some of the techniques with my clients. I'm not an expert in this work at all. I'm quite new to the kind of spinning baby side of things, at least. Although it's been really interesting for me learning about it, because a lot of the information that you're given, and that, a lot of the courses that I've done, I've been one of the only non-midwives in the room, and the midwives are just minds blown by some of the information about the pelvis and, the anatomy of the pelvis that they're not trained in, which is, I didn't know that. And a lot of the information as a Pilates teacher was quite straightforward to me. But it's not necessarily widely known within the birth world. So I think the kind of combination of the midwife aspect of it and then the Pilates aspect of it is just such a great combination to help you to understand more what's happening in your body. So this is just a testimonial from one of my clients who I used these particular techniques with on a one-to-one basis. She said that she managed to stay at home for the majority of her labour. She actually arrived at the hospital when she was 10 centimetres dilated, so didn't have a huge amount of time in the hospital. And she said that all her Pilates really helped her with the strength to labour at home for as long as possible, maintain comfortable positions, and here's the key thing, make sure that the baby was in an optimum position. And we did a one-to-one Zoom class because she was told that her baby wasn't in a great position for birth when I can't remember how many weeks she would have been now, like fairly early, maybe about 32 weeks. And we did a lot of this work together, and she continued to do the Pilates classes, and then the baby moved. And as you can see, she had a very smooth process. And she also did hypnobirthing, not with me, I might add. But I do really believe that the combination of using hypnobirthing and using these techniques can really make a difference to how your labour progresses. And we've covered this. So now we're going to just talk about another lady who I worked with called Eloise. So I should really do this bit first. She was told she was 40 weeks, and she was told that her baby wasn't in a great position, that its head was really high, that she wasn't ready to labour. And they were starting to talk about induction. She was getting a bit nervous. So I went to her house and we did about 45 minutes of, again, these techniques, and a lot of the stuff that I recommend is stuff that we do in Pilates anyway. But I don't necessarily always talk about exactly why we're doing it. I sometimes do. But she said, thank you so much for arming me with so much information, and knowing you were there for those last minutes of questions and support, especially with the spinning babies at the end, was really so reassuring, and remarkably it worked. And that's, again, those are the two people I've got testimonials from, but I have used it on other people throughout the last sort of year or so. And like I say, it's not huge numbers, but every single person, their baby has moved. So I do really recommend that if you have issues with your baby's positioning, that you do start to think about this work. So just to bust a few myths about positioning for babies, breech is quite a common position for babies to get into, which is where baby ends up being bummed down. Now, you can have a vaginal birth with a breech baby, but it's much harder work in terms of the hospitals don't necessarily support it very easily. You'll have to find a way to make that happen if you really wanted to have a vaginal birth. And a lot of people do end up deciding to have a cesarean birth. Another option that you're given before you choose to have a planned cesarean is called an ECV, which is where they basically physically manually move the baby. And obviously it's entirely going to be your decision whether you decide to go for an ECV, but there's quite a few risks that run alongside it, and I would really recommend you do a lot of research into it. It can be quite painful for you, and if I was in that position of wanting to turn a baby, there'd be a lot of things that I would want to try before having an ECV. And one of the reasons for that is that I really believe that some babies get into their position for a reason, and that they are supposed to be, not in optimal fetal position. Maybe their placenta cord is a bit short, and if they turned into optimal fetal position, it would pull on the cord, or, maybe there's just not the space in your body. So if you're trying to physically force it and the space isn't there, then it just isn't helpful for anybody. So, but I do also believe that your posture and your fascial restrictions could change everything. So fascia is all of the connective tissue that runs throughout your body. And hopefully, if you're doing the classes, you know this, but if you've got tightness in your right foot, then that can have an impact on your left shoulder potentially. Everything in your body is connected, and particularly when it comes to your pelvis and so on, if you've got a lot of tightness in your right buttock, then that could really have an impact on your baby's positioning and how easy it is for the baby to move through the birth canal. And if you make changes to your posture, to do some release work, do some work on your movement patterns, there is a chance that could help the baby to move. There's never any guarantees, but all of this stuff is really easy to do and really worth looking into as an option. So another myth about birthing is that women should be giving birth lying on their backs. This is a terrible position to birth in. It's really, there's not many times that being on your back is going to help you out at all. It restricts your sacrum. So if you look at the pelvis here, and this sacrum is restricted, it's stuck, but ideally your sacrum is able to move, and so then when the baby's coming through your pelvis, your sacrum is able to lift and make space for the baby to come through. Whereas if you're on your back, it can't do that, and it makes it a lot harder for the baby to get out. And I mean, obviously also gravity isn't helping you, so any position where gravity helps you is also a good thing. But purely from a biomechanics perspective, you have a lot less space if your sacrum is restricted. And this also applies, so sometimes midwives move the bed so that you can birth kind of in this sort of slightly reclined position. And again, I would say try not to go into that position if you can, because again, your sacrum, and it's actually probably more restricted there. Like if all of your weight is pressing down onto your sacrum while gravity is helping you, your pelvis is just really stuck, and you don't want a stuck pelvis in labour. You want as much mobility in your pelvis as you can. So lying on your back makes it more difficult for the baby to descend and come through the pelvis, and we need to create space as much as possible. Space is the key. I also think that there's a bit of a myth around in society that there's nothing you can do about where your baby goes. Like I said earlier, I do believe there are situations when babies get into a certain position for a reason. However, there's a lot that you can do as a pregnant woman to improve your baby's chances of getting into a good position. Your body has an impact on where your baby goes to. And in fact, everything that you've ever done with your body influences it as well. So, for example, if you fell down the stairs when you were 10 and knocked your pelvis out of alignment, you may still be holding onto that, and there may still be some restrictions from that. Again, if you hurt your foot, if you hurt your shoulder, all of those things are going to have an impact on how your body is currently functioning. So everything in your body is connected, and there is lots that you can do to help your baby find a good position. As I've already said some of this stuff, but you don't necessarily need to start doing loads of exercises, although I would suggest that some exercises are good, particularly if you find out that your baby isn't in a great place. But small day-to-day changes can be just as important. So one thing that is really worth mentioning is sofas. So I'm not suggesting that you can never chill out on the sofa when you're pregnant. Of course, it's really important to relax and to, have a nice, comfortable place where you feel safe and happy. However, if you're kind of slumping onto the sofa at 7 o'clock every night and then not leaving the sofa until 11 o'clock, it's also when, having a good old Netflix binge, which there is absolutely nothing wrong with. But it's not going to be great in terms of your baby's positioning and how your pelvis moves. So if I just show you, if you're slumping, for one thing, your pelvis is really restricted. So again, it's not going to help you to get that lovely mobility that we want during labor. But also your baby's spine is heavy, and your baby's spine might move round to the back and end up in a back-to-back position, which does make it more difficult to labor in. And also, again, you're not giving your baby lots of space here, and you're not encouraging your body to create space. You're encouraging your body to restrict at the front. And what we want is for you to be sat on your sit bones, giving loads of room for your bump, loads of room for your baby to move and get into a good position. So a great option, rather than sitting on the sofa, is to get hold of a Swiss ball, like a birthing ball, the big blow-up balls, and sit on those. Or just to mix it up, even if you're lying on your side on the sofa, that's much better than leaning backwards. So if you just come and snuggle up and lie on your side, then that's going to give the baby space. And again, your sacrum has room to move. You're not restricting your pelvis. And it is worth considering going to see an osteopath, even if you're not in any pain, if you know that you've had, like if you've ever had a big car accident, or had fallen off a horse, or had some kind of quite significant trauma to your body, or even or like broke your ankle. So it doesn't need to be like a traumatic experience, but some kind of thing where your body has gone through quite a lot and you may not necessarily have fully rehabilitated it. So I'd really encourage you, particularly if you know that you've got some kind of history like that, to go and see an osteopath and just get everything checked out. Make sure your pelvis is aligned, make sure you're using your legs equally, and really, give your body the best possible chance of having of everything getting into the places that it wants to get into. So we're going to talk a little bit now about presentation and positioning during birth and in labour. Something I want to just say before I go into all of this is that I really believe that some of these statistics, or in fact a large majority of these statistics, are because of the systemic failures within our birthing system. So I'm not saying that these rates are going up because women are doing everything wrong. However, I do think that our current lifestyles don't point us in the direction of getting our bodies in the best possible shape for birth. Like, for example, we all love a Netflix binge these days, and people didn't used to do that. We didn't used to watch 5 episodes of something in a row. And so our movement patterns have changed, and we need to be aware of that. There are lots of other reasons that these rates have gone up, but I do think that it's important for you to understand that there is the possibility that one of the reasons is also that we're not using our bodies like they were designed to be used. So babies who are in occiput posterior position are significantly more likely to require an emergency cesarean compared with babies in occiput transverse position. So occiput posterior is basically, as I talked about, when the baby's head is in the opposite direction and its back is back to back with the mum's back. So that makes your birth more difficult. You're more likely to end up needing to have a cesarean because of that difficult position. I do also want to flag that it doesn't mean you are going to have a cesarean. Plenty of people do end up being able to get the baby to move, or just find a way of getting the baby out anyway. But the more we can do to get the baby into a good position, the better. the cesarean rate has increased dramatically in the last 20 years. In 2000, 19.7% of babies were born via cesarean. In 2015, it was 26.2%, and I think it's something like 28% of babies are now born via cesarean. And the World Health Organization advice is that it shouldn't really be more than about 15%. So something is going wrong. It is not all about baby's position. There are a lot of other things that are for another day, but it's, baby's position is a factor in how smoothly your birth goes. So the more you can do, the better. And and also assisted vaginal births, so forceps, Fontus, those rates are also on the increase. Everybody ideally wants to avoid those. It's not great for your pelvic floor. Another thing to be conscious of is that if you have had a breech baby already, you're more likely to have another. And this is completely my opinion, so I'm not getting this on any basis from any evidence. But I would say that may well be because your baby may have been breached because of a restriction or the position of your uterus, and therefore the second baby is going to be the same. Again, there may be things like sometimes people's uterus position is just there, in a slightly misaligned place. I said misaligned, that's the wrong word. Sometimes people's uterus is not in kind of the standard position for a uterus, and that may be why your baby can't get into optimal fetal position. In that case, there may be nothing you can do. So I'm giving you all this information, but I also don't want you to go away from it feeling like if your baby does end up in the wrong position, it's because you've done everything wrong. It's really may well not be that. But I want you to have this information so that you can try and give your body a good chance. So I want to teach you some simple things that you can do and arm you with as much information as possible in the hope that you can have a lovely, smooth labour and delivery. So there's quite a few things that are recommended during pregnancy. I've got 2 slides here to talk about different things you can do. One thing that I would really encourage as much of as possible is walking. Ideally, they say 3 miles a day if you can. Obviously, that is quite a lot. It may not be realistic for you, but if you can fit it in, if you can try and start walking to work or doing the school run when you might usually drive, something that you do every day, if you can just swap it to walk it, that could make quite a big difference. If you have pelvic girdle pain, I would still advise you to be as active as possible, but only when you're not in pain. So if you're in pain, then don't listen to some of this advice, because you don't want to be pushing through pain. That's not necessarily going to help with getting your baby into a good position. It's not going to help your birth if you're in agony before the contractions even start. However, again, pain, please go and see a women's health osteopath. I've had very few clients, in fact I can't actually think of anybody who hasn't gone to my local women's health osteopath and had brilliant results. So I really encourage you, if that is your situation, don't just assume that you can't do anything. Go and see a women's health osteopath, and then hopefully you may not be able to do 3 miles a day, but you may be able to do half a mile, which is better than nothing. So swimming is a brilliant way of getting your body active, and therefore allowing your baby that space, and that movement is so important. Like coming back to walking, when you walk, your pelvis swings slightly, your rib cage swings, you mobilize the fascia throughout your entire body. And the same when you're swimming, like all movement is encourages mobility, and that's what we want, is that sense of softness and ease of movement throughout your body when you're pregnant. So obviously I'm biased, so I would say do Pilates with me, but do Pilates with anybody who is well trained. Anybody, yoga as well can be brilliant during pregnancy, but be really aware that your teacher needs to have up-to-date specialist training. So for example, if I could call myself a specialist in pre and postnatal Pilates, having only done the very first pre and postnatal course that I did in 2010, I think it was, or maybe 2010. It was the end of 2010, I think. And I could still be calling myself a pre and postnatal specialist on the basis of that course, which is coming up to 10 years ago. I would not be a specialist if that was the only course I'd done. That a lot of the information that I was given in that course is completely out of date now. So it you need to look at what training people have had and how much they update it. You know, if they've done one course in it but nothing else, how much of a specialist really are they? You know, there's plenty of teachers who are doing constant work on pre and postnatal, and that's, you know, their life's work. And find those teachers. I'm one of them. But you know, whether it's me or not, do find a teacher who knows their stuff. So work on your movement patterns. This is kind of my thing. It's really crucial. The better you can get your body moving day to day, the easier your birth process is likely to be. And again, there's never any guarantees in labour. I don't want you to give yourself a hard time about it, but I want you to be aware that, you know, if you're always standing with your weight in your right leg, that's going to potentially tighten the right side of your pelvis and give you some restrictions. That if you can let go of that and start to bring your weight more centrally, it's going to make a difference. Calf stretches are a really great thing to do. So I really encourage everybody to roll their feet on spiky balls or tennis balls, any kind of ball, to release fascial restrictions in your feet. Calf stretches, because if your calves are tight, it has an impact all the way up the back of your body. So the back of your pelvis will also be tight if your calves are. The alignment of your legs, if your legs are always internally rotating, for example, or in fact internally or externally rotating, it's going to place pulls on your hip joints, which again are going to then feed into your pelvic floor. So every single thing you do with your body has an impact, and you know, it's really useful for you to be aware of that. There's going to be things that you can't and aren't going to change, but there are things that you can do that will make a difference. And you know, like I say, if you can just think about, in fact, I'm sitting now with my legs crossed. If you sit with your legs crossed every day, that is going to put some kind of pull into your pelvis. So again, if you can just sit with your feet planted on the ground, give yourself that sense of mobility and center, it's really going to help you to it's really going to help your pelvis to be nice and aligned. Wearing a correct size bra is really important. If you think of how often you spend wearing a bra, if you're always tightening and pulling around your rib cage, your ribs are so important. The movement of your rib cage, the movement of your diaphragm, it all ties in. And if so, you know, checking that is a really basic way of giving your fascia more mobility and more movement. So again, I'd really encourage you to see an osteopath or other professional, especially if you've got any previous injuries. Other things you can do, using a birth ball was a brilliant idea. Avoid reclining on sofas, looking at your posture, especially when you're sitting. So again, just checking, I mentioned it when I talked about the sofa, but for example, if you're sitting at a desk all day, if you can make sure that you're sitting on top of your sit bones rather than slumping back, which is, you know, where most of us naturally go to. And you may not manage it all day. It may be that, you know, just for 5 minutes every day, you have that awareness, and that 5 minutes is 5 minutes, you know, it makes a difference. Another thing to be conscious of is that I can feel it myself, like when you bring yourself onto your sit bones, it's quite common to then throw your rib cage forwards. So you want the back of your pelvis, the back of your ribs, and then the back of your head, all to line up with each other as much as possible, and that will give your body a great starting point. Using rebozo scarves is a great thing to do. I'll come to that a little bit more later. Rebozo are Mexican scarves that you can use to do various different releases to help your pregnant belly. And I unfortunately didn't know about it. Well, I knew about it, but I didn't know enough about how to use it when I was pregnant. But I've done it, you know, people have done it to me postnatally, and even postnatally it feels amazing. So I really wish I'd known about it, and I really encourage you to try and look into that a little bit more if you're interested. So doing spinning babies exercises, which is some stuff that we're going to talk about in a minute, is also a really good idea. And then breathing. So again, your pelvis is impacted by the movement of your rib cage, by the movement of your diaphragm. If you can get your breathing process to work well and your core function and your core synergy to work properly, it's going to make a huge difference in how your body's working during your pregnancy. So addressing your posture. Posture isn't about being stuck in one perfect kind of long, tall spine and being really rigid. But again, particularly when you're pregnant, finding that mobility and that ease of movement is part of having good posture. So looking at your foot position, if you always stand with your feet slightly everted like this, then that everts the thigh bones, and then again it's going to have an impact all the way up into your pelvis. So that is going to affect your pelvic position, where you stand with your pelvis. So sorry, I'm jumping up and down like a mad woman. But if you're standing with your back really arched like this, or if you're standing with your pelvis tucked under, that's going to make a difference. You want to bring yourself into a nice neutral pelvis. So you've got a sense of your tailbone kind of being free behind you, but not just hanging into your lower back. Again, the position of your rib cage, so stacking your ribs over the back of your pelvis can be really useful. Do you tend to stand with your weight on one leg? Do you cross your legs all the time? All of those things make a big difference. So finding your fascial restrictions can also be really helpful. Everything's connected. So if you've got loads of stuck tissue around basically anywhere in your body, it's going to impact the function of your pelvic floor, and it's going to impact where your baby can get to in terms of getting into a good position. So you can release fascia with movement, you can use fascial release balls, or you can have massages and manipulation from somebody else. And I would really encourage you to try and do all of those things during your pregnancy. So coming onto all fours is a great space to hang out when you're pregnant, particularly towards the end. Gives the baby plenty of room. Having that sense of gravity, just pulling gently on the abdominals, just allows your abdominal muscles and all of the fascia around the abdominals to relax and to be nice and soft. And it also increases when you're on all fours. If I show you here again, when you're on all fours, your pelvis is in that position, and it really increases the space between your sit bones. It allows your sacrum to be nice and free. And again, we want to be working on that during your pregnancy. Often people talk about, being on all fours is a great place to labour in, which it is, but it's much more helpful to have got that area nice and released and nice and mobile while you're pregnant, so that when you're then in labour, it's already half the work's done. If you've never done any of that work during your pregnancy, then when you're in labour, your body's like, okay, this is a good position, but it's all still stuck, and we want to get that mobility throughout your pregnancy. So being on all fours, doing pelvic tilts on all fours, circles with your pelvis, anything that mobilizes, rocking forwards and backwards is one of my favorites, to really get that mobility through the hip flexors and that sense of release. And so sifting, so moving on to rebozo, I'm not going to go, I'm not going to demonstrate this, and it's something that I just want you to look into for yourselves. I'm not trained to teach this, particularly online. I don't feel really comfortable with it. But I'm just going to kind of bring it up as something that you can then, there's loads of stuff on YouTube. I've posted a link here to a lady called Sophie Messenger, who does some online workshops and teaches you because you need your partner to be able to do it with your birth partner. Sometimes doulas are trained in this and can do this with you. But basically what it is putting the rebozo under your belly and just gently rocking it, and they call it sifting, like mobilizing the belly. You can do it every day. It softens the broad ligament. So therefore it means that the baby is potentially going to find it easier to get into optimal fetal position. And it's really effective if you do this alongside everything else that we're going to talk about. It can really help baby to get into good positions. And it can be done in early labor. It can be done through your pregnancy every day. It can be done in early labor, in the first stage of labor between contractions. And it's also a really comforting thing. So again, if you've done it throughout your pregnancy, your body will learn to like it. And then when you're in labor, it will trigger your parasympathetic nervous system and trigger that sense of release. And if you do hypnobirthing, you'll also talk about other triggers that you can use. And those things are so important in labor to get into your subconscious and give you that feeling of relaxation and calm. So shaking the apples is another great one, where you put the rebozo onto your pelvis, or somebody puts the rebozo onto your pelvis and then wiggles your pelvis like this. It's brilliant. It feels great, and it works really nicely with that sifting. It can also, if you're in the second stage and things are getting a bit stuck, that can be due to the position of the baby's head, and apparently this can help to release that, to give the baby space to potentially move its head position and allow the baby to move. Side lying release. So again, I want you to go away and look at this yourselves. I'm kind of just giving you a bit of information about it that you can then take away with you. But you're basically, with side lying release, lying on the edge of a bed with your top leg hanging off, and I'm going to show you some images in a minute. And your partner just gently rocks you, and it really helps to release the deep pelvic muscles, including the piriformis, which again we do work on a lot in the classes. But the more you can release that, particularly if things are stuck during labour, can be really helpful. And it can be used if you've had an epidural as well, so that's quite important to know, I think. Forward leaning inversion. In fact, I'm going to come out of this now and come. So side lying release. So this is the position. This is Molly, who trained me. She's amazing, a midwife of years and years and years. So this is the position that you want to get into. Your partner holds you there. You can see here they've got two people supporting you, which is the ideal. And then you've got the top leg hanging off to allow the back of the pelvis to open. And then forward leaning inversion. So this is not really one for labour. It's more one for during pregnancy, particularly if your baby's not in a great position. But also I would still encourage you to do it even if you haven't been told that, because it really helps to get your pelvis nice and balanced. But yeah, that's the position that you get into, and you need, obviously, you can see a partner. It can feel a bit crazy to do that when you're pregnant. I did it when I was pregnant, and it actually feels really good, but it's quite intense. So again, you can see here there's some contraindications, which are hypertension, polyhydramnios, which is when you have a bit too much fluid around the baby, glaucoma, or any condition that increases the risk of stroke. Obviously, if you do it and it doesn't feel good, then you stop immediately. But for a lot of people, it's going to feel really great, that real sense of release. And especially if your baby hasn't been in a great position, it's really good place to go to. And again, so spinningbabies.com, go to that website, look it all up. There's a lot of detailed information on there, and I'd really encourage you to start doing those things. So just coming back now to talk to positions to give birth in, I do really believe that if you're having a physiological labour, so you haven't had any intervention to get your labour to start, that your body will tell you where it wants you to go to. The chances are that that is going to be telling you to get into positions that create space in your pelvis, leaning forwards, on all fours, anything that frees your sacrum and creates space between your sit bones. However, if you do have some intervention, your body won't necessarily tell you these things. And therefore, that's when if you're having a physiological birth, you almost don't want to think about all this. You just let your body do what it's doing, with like the awareness that you may want to bring this in at some point. But if you have intervention, then having that awareness. So for example, it's quite standard once you have an epidural that you lie on your back. I'd really encourage you, if you have an epidural, to spend as much time on your side as possible, particularly in the pushing phase. And anything that you can do to create space in the pelvis. So another thing that's quite important to know is that when you're in the pushing stage, if you're turning your legs out, if you just stand up and do it with me, if you turn your legs out, you can kind of feel how your sit bones draw together a little bit. If you turn your legs in and then bend forwards, in fact, turn your legs out, bend forwards, and feel the space between your sit bones. Now turn your legs in, bend forwards, and hopefully you'll feel how much wider your sit bones are. So when your legs are internally rotated, it's a much better way to get the baby out. So particularly like if you're having an epidural, you lie on your side, if you can turn that top leg in, it will create more space for the baby to come out. So I'd really encourage you to have a think about that and look into that, if you think that an epidural might be an option that you might go for. So that's everything. So I hope that was useful. One thing as well, just I remember somebody asked me this question when I did the talk live, was that how much of this should you do? So with all of the release stuff, I would say about 10 minutes a day is going to be enough. You don't need to go wild. And if you over release, you may then kind of get a bit too mobile and cause yourself pain by, if you're rolling on your spiky balls for hours every day, I wouldn't really recommend doing that. I think 10 minutes or so every day of just mobilizing things that are going to help your pelvis to feel like there's plenty of movement there is quite a good guideline. So I hope that was helpful. Do feel free to get in touch with any questions, and thank you for joining me.